In my world, a gold ring is usually a sign of power, but this morning, it was a death warrant. I rule this city with an iron fist, but I couldn't even keep my own wife from walking out the door with our daughter while I slept in another woman's bed. The note she left said I was dead. By the time this night is over, she might be right. Welcome back to Heart-Woven Tales. I'm Selena, and I hope you're doing wonderfully today. Before we dive into our story, I want to know, where are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing where our amazing viewers are joining us from. And a little request before we begin. Don't skip the ending of today's story. Trust me, it will touch your heart in ways you won't forget. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and let's dive into today's tale together. You're going to feel every twist, every heartbeat, and every moment of emotion. So get comfortable and enjoy. Danny woke to the metallic tang of his own sweat, mingling with the faint sweetness of jasmine that clung stubbornly to the silk sheets. The perfume was sharp, intrusive, like a ghost he could smell but not see, curling around his nostrils, pulling at the corners of his memory. His head throbbed with the dull, persistent echo of last night's whiskey, and the city outside his penthouse windows was still, gray and indifferent, as if it knew nothing of the storm waiting inside him. He rolled over, expecting the familiar warmth of her body, the soft rise and fall that used to anchor him, and instead met the empty chill of absence, the cold edge of betrayal brushing against his ribcage. His fingers fumbled over the sheets, brushing against a hard object, something solid, almost deliberate, that had no business on the mahogany nightstand. The texture was smooth, but the weight pressed down like lead against the skin of his palm, insisting on being noticed. He lifted it carefully, heart hammering against his chest as though it sensed what he had yet to comprehend. It was Leah's wedding ring, gold, shining, impossibly perfect, catching the last hints of city light slicing through the blinds, and yet it seemed to scream at him, a silent accusation louder than any gunshot he'd ever heard. Beneath it, a note rested, edges crisp, handwriting precise, deliberate. No tremor, no hesitation, just certainty, a clarity that burned like ice against the nerve endings of his eyes. You spent your life building an empire of shadows, Danny. I'm finally stepping into the light. His chest constricted, the knot inside tightening as if his ribs themselves were being bound by invisible wire. The words crawled into his mind, and for a moment, he could not breathe, could not think. Everything he had built, everything he had fought for, all the power, all the blood, all the whispered threats and silences in dark alleys, it all felt hollow now, meaningless under the weight of a single ring and one final sentence. Danny's eyes flicked toward the empty space on the bed where she should have been, and the absence was more brutal than any scream. His hands, usually steady enough to hold a rifle, to aim, to take a life without hesitation, shook as he reached for his phone. The screen lit up, harsh and artificial, illuminating the raw lines of his face. He wanted to dial, to call, to demand answers, but the number felt impossible to press. Every finger trembled, as if the memory of her hands, warm, soft, loving, was now replaced by the cold bite of betrayal. He stared at the ring again, rolling it between his thumb and index finger, feeling its curves, its weight, its unyielding permanence. How could something so small carry a world of pain? The ring was more than metal. It was a judgment, a verdict rendered without ceremony. A king stripped of his crown, a man stripped of his claim to the life he thought he controlled. He remembered the day she had first worn it, the first time she had let him slip it onto her finger, their hands trembling in the soft glow of the kitchen light, the scent of rain through the window mixing with her perfume. That memory burned sharper now, a dagger twisting in his chest. Danny's gaze slid to the note again. He read the words aloud, though his voice was rough, cracked, uncertain. You spent your life building an empire of shadows. I'm finally stepping into the light. The syllables lingered in the air, heavy, tangible, like smoke from a gun he had never fired. He could feel the room closing in, the walls narrowing, the chandeliers above him casting fractured shadows like fragmented mirrors, reflecting the man he no longer recognized. His fingers tightened around the phone as if he could squeeze the answers out of it, as if pressing harder would bring Leah back, would reverse the decision he had not even known she was considering. But the silence answered him instead. The phone buzzed, nothing but a notification from the news app, flashing headlines about stock markets, crime, and petty politics, mocking in their irrelevance. Not a message from her, not a whisper, nothing that tethered him to the woman who had once been the axis of his universe. Danny's body moved almost without thought. He rose from the bed, bare feet on the cold marble, each step resonating like the tick of a clock counting down to some inevitable truth. The room smelled of expensive regret, old perfume, alcohol, and leather, every scent a layer of accusation, wrapping him in a cloak of shame he could not shrug off. He noticed the wine glasses on the table, fingerprints smudged along the stems, and he realized he could even feel the phantom weight of her hand where it had brushed the glass, the subtle press of a finger that had once fit perfectly in his own. He stumbled to the window, peering down at the awakening city. Streetlights flickered like fireflies in the fog, indifferent to the devastation that had quietly unfolded above them. He thought of his empire, the men who obeyed him, the fear he commanded with a glance or a whisper. And yet here, in the quiet aftermath of a single night, he felt smaller than he had ever been in a dark alley with a gun pressed to someone's temple. Power had no meaning without her. Influence was worthless without her presence. Even the blood that had cemented his reign, the contracts signed in sweat and fear, seemed to have dried in vain. Danny sank to his knees, still holding the ring and the note. He traced the gold with his thumb, feeling the cold metal burn against the pad of his skin, a reminder that permanence was not always comfort. He remembered her laugh, light and reckless, bouncing off the walls of the penthouse months ago, and now it echoed like a ghost, mocking him. A question pressed itself into his mind. Have you ever lost someone and realized the world you built could not save them? Tell me, what would you do if the person you loved more than life itself walked away silently, leaving only proof that they existed here, and now they are gone? If you've ever felt that, comment below and let the world see your scars. Danny's eyes flicked to the shadows of the room, noticing every detail, the way the chandelier caught the last glint of sunlight, the small scratch on the floorboard near the nightstand, the slight tilt of the painting above the fireplace he had never noticed before. Each detail whispered her presence, each whisper a reminder that she had been here, had touched this space, and had left it forever altered. He realized she hadn't screamed, hadn't demanded, hadn't left a note of anger, only clarity, precision, and inevitability. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from a subordinate, a trivial alert about some minor movement in the city, mundane, meaningless. Danny tossed the phone aside, feeling the futility of communication, the impossibility of control. His hand still shook as he pressed the ring to his lips, feeling the cold bite of metal, and he noticed for the first time a tiny dent along its band, a mark that had never been there before. He imagined the story it told, the unspoken judgment it carried, the silent verdict of a woman who had once given him everything. Danny's breathing became deliberate, slow, as if he could talk himself out of the shock, the grief, the unbearable clarity of abandonment. He began pacing, each footstep precise on the marble, counting, measuring, trying to impose order on the chaos of emotions that roared inside him. His secondary action became mindless. He picked up the empty wine glasses, rinsed them under the cold tap, watching water bead and fall like tears, an echo of the life he had failed to hold. The penthouse seemed alive in its emptiness, each object a character, each scent a message, each shadow a mirror reflecting his own fractured soul. The chandelier swayed slightly from the city breeze, casting fractured prisms of light across the floor, and he imagined her walking past the room, ghost-like, calm, certain, leaving him behind in a kingdom of echoes. Danny's gaze returned to the ring, turning it over in his palm, feeling its weight like the gravity of every decision he had ever made. Every gunshot, every threat, every alliance had led here, to a moment when his power meant nothing, when his identity as a king was measured against the absence of the woman he loved. A question pressed itself to his lips. Would you sacrifice everything for the person you love, or would you fight for power even as they disappear? Pause and think, because sometimes the hardest battles aren't won with guns, but with silence. The dawn broke fully, spilling white light into the room. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, catching on his skin, settling in the grooves of his hands. He knelt there alone, the ring heavy, the note precise, the city awake and indifferent outside. His chest heaved as the weight of realization pressed down. She had not just left, she had judged, decided, and acted. While he slept, Danny's fingers itched to move, to do something, to reclaim even a fragment of what had been taken. But the penthouse offered only echoes. He rose slowly, running his palm along the cool window, feeling the vibrations of the distant traffic through the glass, imagining her reflection there instead of his own. The room seemed to hold its breath, and so did he. He finally picked up the note again, tracing each word with trembling fingertips, tasting the sharp metallic tang of guilt in the air. Every letter burned into him, empire of shadows, stepping into the light. The phrase repeated in his mind like a mantra, a verdict, a final exhalation of a life once intertwined. He realized she had stripped him bare, not physically, not violently, but emotionally, spiritually, leaving him in a void where nothing could anchor him. The final image of the penthouse lingered, the ring gleaming under the unforgiving dawn light, the note crisp and unyielding, the sheets rumpled but empty, and Danny kneeling in silence, a king dethroned, a man measured not by fear or respect, but by the absence of the woman who had made his life whole. The city roared quietly below, indifferent while he remained frozen, a shadow of himself, waiting for the next move in a game he no longer knew how to play. And just as he reached for the phone once more, a whisper of her perfume tickled his senses, lingering, mocking, impossibly present. And Danny froze, caught between anger and longing, between the need to act and the unbearable weight of knowing some things, once lost, could never be reclaimed. The engine roared beneath him, tires scraping asphalt with a metallic hiss as Danny slammed the accelerator. The city streets blurred into streaks of neon and shadow, the reflections of streetlights bouncing off the wet pavement like shards of broken glass. Every turn he took felt like a gamble with fate, the red glow of traffic signals ignored in a dance of desperate urgency. His hands gripped the steering wheel until the leather cut into his palms, the familiar scent of worn leather and cigarette smoke mingling with the perfume that still clung stubbornly to his skin, a ghostly residue from the night he wished he could erase. Danny's mind was a storm of memory and fear. He could see Leah's face, calm and determined in the video from the security vault, the way her lips had whispered a warning he could never forget. The memory coiled in his chest, heavy and cold, and he pressed harder on the pedal, feeling the vibrations of the engine like a heartbeat syncing with his own. Every second brought him closer to the estate, but also closer to a truth he feared might shatter him completely. Had she already left him? Truly? Had she erased their life as if it had never existed? The question pressed into his skull, demanding an answer he wasn't sure he wanted. The drive was chaotic yet purposeful, a mix of adrenaline and ritual. His right hand drummed against the wheel in nervous repetition, a secondary action that helped him process the horror, while his left kept the gear shift steady. The tires screamed in protest as he cut across an intersection, narrowly missing a delivery truck. He barely noticed the horn blaring behind him, the pedestrians frozen mid-step like figures in a painting he had no right to inhabit. Each red light ignored, each turn taken with reckless precision, was a beat closer to the empty foyer he dreaded. The mansion loomed as he approached, the familiar iron gates rising like silent sentinels, untouched, unguarded, waiting for him. Danny slowed for only a heartbeat before charging forward, the crunch of gravel under his tires announcing his arrival like a cannon blast. He expected resistance, expected the familiar faces of his men to emerge, ready to defend what was his. But the silence that greeted him was heavier than any weapon. It was deafening, a vacuum of sound that sucked the air from his lungs. He threw open the front doors, leather gloves sliding against polished brass handles, the echo of his boots on the marble floor rolling like thunder through empty halls. "Leah!" His voice shattered against the high ceilings, bouncing back at him with a hollow, mocking resonance. He called again, louder this time, the syllables trembling despite the strength in his frame. The staff, the servants, the house itself, they were all gone. The silence was absolute, thick enough to choke on. Even the chandeliers seemed to sway in anticipation, dust motes glinting in the pale light like tiny specters. Danny ran, boots thudding against hardwood, with a rhythm that matched his racing heart. Each step was a countdown, a drumbeat of impending doom as he hurtled down the hallways. He had walked 1,000 times with her by his side. The memories pressed in, tactile and insistent. The faint scuff of a chair, the smell of polished wood, the warmth that once lingered here. Now the air smelled only of antiseptic and abandonment, an invisible accusation of his failures. He reached the nursery door, and the sight stole the air from his lungs. The door was wide open, curtains fluttering from the draft that spilled through an unlatched window. Light spilled across the room, pale and unfeeling, illuminating the crib that sat empty but for one small sentinel. In the center of the mattress, her favorite stuffed lion, King, rested upright, as if guarding a space where life should have been. Danny's hand shot out, grasping the toy with trembling fingers, feeling the fabric fray beneath his palm, the familiar softness and the faint scent of baby powder. His chest heaved, each breath tasting of panic and disbelief. He noticed the room in its entirety, each detail screaming absence. The soft pastel walls, once bright with hand-painted stars, were muted now in the gray morning light. A mobile hung still above the crib, plastic planets frozen mid-spin, mocking the motion that had once lulled Mia to sleep. The dresser was orderly, every article of clothing folded with meticulous precision, diapers stacked in neat piles, tiny shoes lined up like soldiers, but the room was sterile. A stage where nothing alive remained, not a toy scattered, not a sock out of place, not a trace of the laughter that used to fill the air. Danny's gaze fell on a single sheet of paper propped against the dresser, a bus schedule, circled in red ink, stark and unyielding. His throat tightened as his fingers brushed against it, tracing the route with trembling precision. 3 states away. The numbers and times seemed to leap off the page, each one a knife twisting in his chest. The realization hit him fully. Leah had not just left. She had planned, calculated, executed with cold clarity. And Mia, his daughter, the one piece of his heart he had promised to protect, was already in motion, a ghost in the world beyond his reach. He sank to his knees in the center of the room, King clutched against his chest, feeling the pulse of the city through the floorboards beneath him. Every heartbeat was a drumbeat of regret, each breath a reminder of the time he had squandered, the moments missed, the betrayals of his own making. The air smelled faintly of soap, clean and sterile, a cruel contrast to the mess of his emotions. His hands, so capable in the world of power and violence, were useless here. He could not fight what had already been set in motion. Danny's eyes swept the room again, taking in every minutia, the slight smudge on the windowsill, the way the curtains caught the breeze, the faint indentation in the mattress where Mia had once lain. Each detail was a whisper from the past, a ghostly echo that refused to be ignored. His mind flashed to their last argument, the tense silence before Leah left, the way she had looked at him. Not with anger, not with fear, but with something infinitely more powerful: resolve. And now that resolve had carried her and Mia out of his life, leaving only evidence of departure. His fingers hovered over the phone once more, but he hesitated. Should he call? Could he even find her? Every instinct screamed to pursue, to mobilize his network, to hunt her down as he had hunted enemies for years. And yet, a deeper, quieter voice whispered that some battles could not be won with men or guns, that some losses required a different kind of surrender. Danny pressed the phone to his ear, then slammed it down, frustrated, angry, trembling in a way he hadn't since childhood. He picked King up, holding the toy close, inhaling the faint scent of his daughter's hair that lingered on it. The smell was intoxicating, almost cruelly vivid, reminding him that she existed somewhere safe and unaware of the chaos swirling around her father. He ran a thumb along the soft mane of the lion, tracing the fabric threads like a tactile map back to the life he had lost. Have you ever held something so small, yet felt the weight of the world pressing down through it? Pause. Comment below if a memory or a loss ever felt larger than life itself. Danny's eyes darted to the window, following the bus route scribbled in red, imagining the journey ahead. The sun rose further, pale light glinting off the metal handle of the crib, reflecting the fragmented state of his mind. The room felt simultaneously vast and claustrophobic, a paradox of emptiness and suffocating presence, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for him to unravel completely. He began pacing the room, the secondary action of restless movement giving him a tether to reality. Each step echoed, each turn marking time against the drum of his own heartbeat. He touched the dresser, ran a hand along the polished wood, noticing tiny scratches and dents he had never seen before. They felt like messages from an invisible witness, each mark a testimony to the life that had once been here and the silence that now ruled. A draft brushed his neck from the unlatched window, cold and unforgiving. The curtains swayed, and with them, a memory of Mia laughing, calling his name, tugging at his sleeve. He could almost hear it, a whisper of life that was no longer present. His breathing caught, chest tightening, and a question surfaced for anyone watching. What would you do if the one person who made life worth living disappeared in a single night? Would you chase them, or would you let them go to keep them safe? Pause. Subscribe for more stories like this, where every choice weighs heavier than a crown. Danny's gaze returned to King, gripping it tightly. He noticed a tiny tear along the lion's paw, the stitching fraying as if it had borne witness to a journey far beyond its intended purpose. He pressed the paw to his lips, tasting the faint trace of powder and cloth, a sensory echo of the daughter he could not see. The room was a crucible of absence, where every object carried memory, every shadow whispered accusation, every ray of light highlighted what had been stolen from him. Time seemed to stretch, the seconds dragging as he processed the impossibility of what Leah had done. His empire, his reputation, his identity as a king of the East Coast, all paled beside the fact that Mia was gone, carried out of reach by a mother whose resolve outmatched his obsession. He thought of the empire of shadows he had built, the walls of fear and respect, the invisible threads that had once bound the city to his will, and realized they meant nothing here in the hollow echo of a child's absence. He rose once more, running his hand along the crib's rail, feeling the cold, unyielding metal. The metaphor was sharp. Everything he had built, strong and imposing, now hollowed from within, and yet the toy in his hand, frayed and soft, remained, a fragile anchor to life, to love, to hope he wasn't sure he deserved. Danny's attention shifted to the bus schedule again, circling red ink a stark, cruel exclamation mark against the sterile paper. He memorized the route, the stops, the times, imagining himself trailing them like a shadow, following without leaving a trace. But even in the fantasy, he knew he could not protect them without exposing them to the world he had ruled. His power would make them a target, and so he froze, caught between paternal instinct and ruthless reason, a king outmaneuvered by love itself. The nursery seemed to pulse around him, the air vibrating with memory, each breath carrying weight, each sound amplified in silence. His palms sweated against King, against the leather of his gloves, against the cruel reality of absence. He pressed his forehead to the crib rail, feeling the cool wood against his skin, imagining the warmth that had once filled this room. And he realized, with a slow, crushing certainty, that he had been left not just by a wife, not just by a child, but by the life he had believed unassailable. A soft breeze through the open window rustled the curtains again, and Danny's eyes followed its dance, imagining it as Leah, fleeting and untouchable. His fingers twitched toward the latch, a subconscious wish to close the portal, to seal the room and the memory, but he stopped. He could not contain what had already been set in motion. He sank to the floor once more, King pressed against his chest, and let himself feel the full weight of absence, of love lost, of the echo of a ghost haunting every corner of his world. And in that silence, in that sterile light and empty room, the final image lingered. Danny kneeling, a king dethroned, a father rendered powerless, holding a small, frayed lion that smelled faintly of powder and hope, while outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the human heart breaking within its walls. Danny's fingers hovered over the vault panel, knuckles white, pulse hammering like the warning sirens of a city under siege. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights overhead mixed with the low vibration of the servers, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed almost alive, judging him. Sweat beaded at his temples, smelling faintly of whiskey, leather, and the lingering trace of jasmine that had never fully left his skin since Leah had vanished. He pressed the first sequence of codes, then the second, then the third, his movements frantic, each keystroke a percussion of desperation. The monitors flickered, a kaleidoscope of green and blue lights, until the hallway footage from 3 a.m. came alive, and Danny froze mid-breath. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Leah moved with a quiet elegance, her steps measured, deliberate, carrying Mia like a fragile treasure. The denim jacket she wore was simple, unremarkable to anyone else, yet in that simplicity lay a power he had never understood. She was no longer the woman who had cried at his threats, no longer the girl who had once trembled at his anger. She was calm, terrifyingly calm, radiating a peace that mocked every empire he had ever ruled. Danny's hand went to the monitor, pressing against the glass as if he could pull her back into his world, as if his reflection could somehow morph into her path. The air in the vault room was thick, vibrating with static energy from the screens, a faint ozone scent from the circuits blending with the sharper metallic tang of his panic. Danny's breath fogged in the cold, controlled air, and each exhale trembled as he realized the horrifying clarity. Leah had done this under his nose. Every step she took was measured, intentional, almost theatrical, designed to be observed by him, and yet untouchable. Her head tilted slightly, the dim light catching the curve of her cheek, the gentle fall of hair against Mia's cheek, and in that moment Danny saw not anger, not despair, but an unspeakable serenity. Mia slept in Leah's arms, tiny and fragile, her breaths even, soft, the faint rustle of her blanket like a lullaby only Danny could imagine. He reached forward, fingertips hovering over the screen as if to touch them, but the glass offered no passage, only reflection. The girl's presence, so small, so perfectly innocent, was an anchor, a tether to a life he no longer had access to. The juxtaposition of powerlessness and desire struck him like a physical blow. His fingers fumbled against the console, his glove catching a wire, tugging it slightly. The soft electronic whine of the system, a reminder that even here, his control was partial, fragile, provisional. He watched as Leah approached the hidden camera, stopping just beneath its lens. Danny's pulse spiked, the sharp metallic tang in his throat intensifying, and he felt an almost instinctive fear ripple through him. She knew. She had known all along that he would watch. The thought clawed at him. Had she planned every move to reach this moment, to teach him something he had refused to learn for years? His knuckles whitened around the edge of the console as he leaned closer, trying to see her lips, to decipher the slow, deliberate movement that spelled out words he could read in horror. "You can find anyone in this world, Danny," she whispered, the sound absent from the air but present in his mind. "But you'll never find the version of us you just killed." The words landed in him like bullets without casing, invisible yet piercing, detonating memories he had tried to lock away. The empire he had built, the alliances, the fear he commanded, they meant nothing here. Nothing could undo the version of the life they had been, the intimacy, the laughter, the stolen mornings before violence and power had swallowed them whole. Danny's chest tightened, a knot of fire and ice burning across his sternum. He pressed both hands against the console as if to steady himself, but the motion was ineffective against the weight of realization. His mind replayed every moment he could recall, the late nights in the office, the subtle betrayals and whispers he had ignored, the small resentments that had grown like weeds between them. Every memory was now magnified under this lens of betrayal, every detail sharp and unforgiving. He saw Leah not as the woman who had laughed and loved him, but as a strategist, a mother, a survivor, and he, for all his power, was reduced to a helpless observer. She reached up, her fingers brushing against the sensor panel near the exit, and Danny felt a physical jolt run through him. That small action, a gesture so slight, carried the weight of all the lessons he had failed to teach her. She disabled the exterior sensors, the same trick he had taught her months ago for her protection. The irony was a knife twisting. The man who had built walls of steel and fear had unknowingly created the very escape route that liberated the two people he loved most. The screen went static, a harsh, unfeeling blackness that mirrored the emptiness forming in his chest. Danny staggered back, his reflection in the dark monitor staring at him, accusing, mocking. The man who had ruled with bullets, contracts, and fear now faced an opponent that required no violence, no intimidation, only clarity and resolve. He was stripped bare, confronted by the stark truth that power meant nothing against a mother's will and a woman's decision to reclaim her life. The room smelled of ozone, sweat, and burnt circuits, each inhalation sharp, electric, a sensory jolt tethering him to reality. He ran a hand over his face, feeling stubble scrape against trembling fingers, tasting the faint residue of coffee and cigarette ash. Memories of mornings with Mia came flooding back. The smell of baby powder, the warmth of her tiny hands on his chest, the sound of her laughter echoing through the halls of the penthouse. Now all that existed were ghosts, and the camera's static was a cruel reminder that ghosts could move freely, while he remained trapped in his own reflection. Danny's secondary action became frantic. He began typing, inputting sequences, bypassing codes, his fingers moving with mechanical precision, scanning other cameras, other doors, other windows. Every monitor flickered in his peripheral vision, but every hallway was empty, every room sterile, every moment a record of absence. And yet, a creeping suspicion clawed at him. What if she had anticipated every countermeasure, every surveillance camera, every alarm he could deploy? The thought gnawed at him, bitter and precise. He leaned closer to the monitor, tracing Leah's figure with his eyes, memorizing the curve of her shoulder, the tilt of Mia's head, the calm determination in her posture. Have you ever watched someone leave your world and felt the floor shift beneath you, the air thicken, the universe itself rearrange without permission? Pause. Comment below. How would you react if the person you loved had outmaneuvered you emotionally and physically, leaving only silence and a trail of evidence behind? Danny's breathing quickened, mixing with the faint hum of servers and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. The vault's cold air pressed against his skin, goosebumps rising along his forearms as he realized the horror was complete. The woman he had once ruled over with charm, fear, and power had become his superior in every possible dimension. He was not a king here, not a father, not even a man with control. He was a witness to his own undoing. He pressed a hand against the console, feeling the faint warmth of electronics beneath the smooth plastic, grounding himself in the tactile sensation, the reality that he existed, that he could act. But the action he desired was futile. Each muscle tensed, each heartbeat a percussion in the hollow chest of the vault. And yet, he did not call his captains, did not send men to track Leah, did not draw a gun or even reach for the phone. His instinct screamed, but logic, bitter and undeniable, tethered him. Pursuit would endanger them, not save them. Danny's eyes returned to the static, the black void of the monitor, and he could see only fragments of himself reflected, a man haunted, hollowed, stripped of illusions. Every detail of Leah's calm, every precise step, every whispered word was a mirror of all he had failed to understand. The lesson burned like a branding iron. He had killed the version of their life he had thought invincible, the version that had existed before obsession, before empire, before the slow erosion of trust. His secondary action became obsessive, tracing maps, scanning street views, rewatching timestamps, but the truth was immutable. Each replay of the footage reinforced the clarity. Leah's plan had been precise, flawless, executed with terrifying serenity. Danny's pulse pounded in rhythm with the flashing monitors, a drumbeat of futility, while the reflection in the dark screen seemed to whisper, "Power is meaningless without love, and love is worthless if misused." And in that room, in that cold, humming vault, Danny stood alone, a king dethroned by strategy, by calm, by a woman who understood both love and detachment. The final image lingered. Leah's denim jacket, Mia's tiny sleeping head tucked into her mother's neck, the static screen between him and them, and Danny's own eyes reflecting back in horror and awe, powerless to intervene. The screen went dead. Only his reflection remained. And somewhere, deep inside, a question formed for anyone watching. Would you fight for love when the only battlefield is your own failure? Or would you step aside and let the ones you love escape, even if it destroys you? Pause. Subscribe for more stories where love, power, and betrayal collide in ways you can't forget. Danny's boots scuffed against the wet pavement as he left the vault, the weight of the monitor's reflection clinging to him like a second skin. The city was alive and indifferent, neon lights flickering against the rain-slicked streets, steam rising from grates like ghosts dancing in the night air, the smell of hot asphalt mixed with car exhaust and distant fried food, an urban symphony that did nothing to anchor him, nothing to soften the ache of absence pressing against his ribs. 48 hours stretched before him, not measured in minutes, but in the burning sensation of cold dread sliding along his spine. He avoided the usual routes, opting instead for narrow side streets and alleys that smelled of damp concrete and mildew. Each corner turned brought memories that gnawed at him. The little bookstore on 9th, where Leah had lingered for hours. fingertips tracing dusty shelves, lost in worlds of ink and paper. He imagined her there now, hiding among the stacks, reading to Mia in a hushed voice, each syllable an echo of a life he had ruined. He rubbed a hand over the steering wheel, feeling the worn leather thread into his skin, a secondary action that grounded him against the tidal wave of panic. At a small park, he paused, letting the car idle while he scanned the empty benches. The scent of wet grass and soil pressed against him, reminding him of mornings chasing Mia across the lawn, her laughter splitting the silence like fireworks. Now the playground was empty, swings creaking in the breeze as if warning him of what he had lost. Danny stepped out of the car, letting the cold morning air cut through his jacket, feeling goosebumps rise along his arms. Have you ever returned to a place where life used to bloom and realized it had moved on without you? Pause. Comment if you felt that invisible shift, that quiet erasure. The diner on the edge of the county appeared like a mirage, its flickering neon sign buzzing intermittently. Open. A half-hearted invitation to a world that was no longer his. Inside, the smell of frying bacon and coffee greeted him, warm and sticky, but tinged with the faint undertone of grease and regret. Danny's gloves slipped against the photo in his hand, crumpled from repeated handling, edges soft and frayed. Mia's tiny face stared back at him, eyes bright and innocent, oblivious to the chaos he had unleashed. He approached the counter, the vinyl stools squeaking under his boots, and the waitress, middle-aged with hair pulled into a messy bun, glanced up with tired eyes. The fluorescent lights overhead cast shadows beneath her cheekbones, highlighting years of endurance and small kindnesses unnoticed by the world. Danny pressed the photo toward her, a silent plea woven into the creases of paper. She leaned in, squinting, then smiled. Genuine, unguarded, human, in a way he had not encountered in years of ruling fear and respect. "Sweet girl," she said, voice low and deliberate, wiping the counter in circular motions, the cloth squeaking softly. The mother said they were starting over because her husband had passed away in a tragic accident. Danny froze mid-breath, the words landing like shards of ice in his lungs. He pressed his fingers against the countertop, feeling the cold laminate bite through his gloves. He wanted to speak, to argue, to claim his existence, but the words lodged in his throat. The chill crawling up his spine wasn't just the morning air, it was the realization that in Leah's world, he no longer existed. He was officially dead. The man who wore the crown of the East Coast, who had commanded fear and respect, was a corpse in her narrative. He slid into a booth, boots scraping against linoleum, a secondary action grounding him while his mind spun with disbelief. The faint smell of coffee and burnt toast clung to the air, a sensory tether to humanity he had long abandoned. His hands rubbed over the photo again, tracing Mia's tiny fingers, the curl of her hair, the roundness of her cheeks. Every detail was amplified by the horror of separation. He realized with a jolt that power had never been about territory, not about fear. It was about family, the fragile warmth he had once taken for granted. The diner clock ticked deliberately, each second a hammer striking the walls of his mind. His phone buzzed across the table, screen lighting up with a message from his second in command. War was brewing among his ranks. Men he had trusted, men who had obeyed without question, now sensed weakness. The kingdom he had built trembled, cracking in the shadows of his personal collapse. Danny stared at the message, then without thinking, threw the phone into the trash can outside. The metallic clang of its landing echoed in the quiet diner, a symbolic act of rejection. The throne meant nothing if the ones he loved were gone. He walked back to his car, leather jacket brushing against his forearms, the photo still clutched in one hand, the other brushing against the worn grip of the steering wheel. Steam rose from the radiator, curling into the crisp air like ghostly fingers, and Danny's mind raced. Every instinct screamed caution, every muscle prepared for confrontation, yet his eyes caught a black sedan in the distance. It wasn't one of his men. The weight of suspicion settled over him like wet cement, pressing down with inevitability. The sedan followed as he pulled onto the county road, tires hissing on asphalt, engine low and growling. Danny's knuckles whitened on the wheel as he tried to determine if it was chance or calculation, each movement of the rearview mirror a silent interrogation. The smell of fuel and damp earth mixed with the lingering perfume of past nights, a sensory overlap that made his head swim. He had no reinforcements, no guns drawn, nothing but instinct and raw, untamed panic. He considered swerving, doubling back, testing the pursuit, but each potential move carried risk. Whoever was in that sedan had patience and strategy, watching him with intent. Danny's breath came in shallow gasps, fingers drumming nervously on the wheel as he considered the implications. Have you ever felt someone watching you, their gaze invisible but heavy, pressing into your mind and forcing you to second-guess every choice? Pause. Tell us in the comments, how would you act if the only person pursuing you wasn't an enemy of flesh, but a shadow of suspicion? Danny's eyes shifted to the photo again. Mia's bright smile, captured in a single moment, anchored him to a humanity he had ignored for decades. The soft curl of hair, the faint blush of her cheeks, the innocence preserved in a single image. It contrasted violently with the harsh reality of the black sedan. One was fragile, delicate, pure. The other, a predator waiting to exploit weakness. He felt the tension coil in his stomach, a physical knot that matched the tightening in his chest. The sedan mirrored his movements, maintaining distance but matching every maneuver. Danny's breathing grew heavier, tasting the iron tang of adrenaline on his tongue. Steam rose from the radiator like a living creature, each wisp an omen he could not ignore. He tapped the wheel in rapid staccato, secondary action keeping his nerves engaged while his mind analyzed the possibilities. Should he accelerate? Should he confront? Every choice felt like a risk to Leah and Mia, yet to stand still was equally dangerous. The roadside scenery blurred into muted shades of green and gray, trees flickering past like witnesses to a drama he had never anticipated. Danny's leather gloves pressed harder into the wheel, veins popping at the pressure, his pulse hammering in sync with the rhythm of the tires over uneven asphalt. Every sound, the hum of the engine, the distant bark of a dog, the occasional honk, was amplified, exaggerated, a sensory overload that matched the storm in his chest. He glanced again at the photo of Mia, feeling the tiny curl of her hand against her mother's neck, a memory frozen in time, yet alive in consequence. Danny's chest tightened, the contrast between the small, delicate life and the looming threat of pursuit nearly unbearable. He knew instinctively that the black sedan would not make a mistake, would not falter. It was patient, deliberate, a shadow stalking him and threatening everything he had left. A gust of wind blew through the open window, carrying the scent of wet grass, distant bakery bread, and exhaust fumes, a disorienting sensory cocktail that pressed his senses into overdrive. Danny's secondary action became frantic tapping on the dashboard, each beat a metronome keeping his panic tethered to reality. He considered calling his captains, mobilizing his network, but the memory of Leah disabling the sensors, moving with precision, reminded him that technology, strategy, and fear were meaningless if he acted rashly. The sedan adjusted its speed in perfect harmony with his own, a predator with patience. Danny's mind raced with scenarios, contingency plans, and worst-case outcomes. Each calculation was layered atop the emotional avalanche, threatening to overwhelm him. The loss of Mia, the realization that Leah had orchestrated this with surgical perfection, and the gnawing awareness that he had been blind, arrogant, and ultimately defeated without a single shot fired. His eyes flicked again to Mia's photo, tracing the line of her smile, the faint dimples that mirrored Leah's. Every detail was a lifeline, a fragile tether to what truly mattered, and yet the black sedan loomed in his periphery, an uninvited variable in a game that had once been entirely his. Danny's pulse raced, his palms slick against the wheel, and he realized with cold clarity that the only way to protect them was to confront uncertainty head-on, not with guns or power, but with caution, patience, and the resolve to endure. The road stretched before him like a ribbon of destiny, asphalt glittering with rain, reflecting the pale morning light. Steam rose from the tires, curling in twisting shapes that seemed alive, mirroring Danny's internal turmoil. He shifted gears, hand shaking slightly, and the sedan mirrored him again, patient, unyielding, silent, a physical embodiment of the consequences of his mistakes. Danny's eyes narrowed, scanning every rearview mirror, every side street, every flicker of movement, yet nothing revealed the occupant's identity. A knot of tension wrapped around his chest, constricting, suffocating, while adrenaline coursed through his veins. Have you ever realized that someone you thought was powerless could watch your every move and exploit your weakness without a single word spoken? Pause. Comment below if you've ever felt that invisible, suffocating presence. The diner, the park, the bookstores, all flashes of memory, each one a ghost of life he could not reclaim. Danny's heart pounded as he considered Leah and Mia, safe for now, unknown to him, yet always one step ahead. He realized that the true empire he had built was not in fear, contracts, or territory, but in the fragile, irreplaceable presence of those he loved. Losing that was a death far sharper than any bullet could deliver. And in that realization, the chapter closed with a haunting image. Danny, sitting in the driver's seat of his black car at the edge of the county, holding the crumpled photo of Mia, the black sedan looming silently behind him, the morning mist curling like smoke around his chest as the first rays of sunlight glinted off the wet. Asphalt reflecting a king dethroned and hunted, yet tethered to hope by the memory of what mattered most. Danny's boots crunched over gravel as he entered the industrial lot, the sharp scent of rusted iron and oil rising in waves that pricked at his nostrils. Puddles reflected broken neon from a distant warehouse, each ripple distorting the faint morning sun into fractured, unreal shards. Steam hissed from vents like whispered warnings, and the wind carried the acrid tang of scorched rubber and old gasoline, mixing with his own sweat and the lingering perfume of Leah, a sensory overlay that made his head spin. He gripped the edge of his jacket, secondary action to anchor himself, and scanned the lot with eyes narrowed, every shadow a potential threat. The black sedan slid into a corner, tires crunching gravel, engine growling low and deliberate. Danny's heart hammered, each beat echoing off the corrugated steel of the surrounding buildings. The car door opened with a metallic hiss, and the figure of Victor emerged, tall, sharp, the morning sun glinting off his expensive watch and the jagged grin splitting his face. Danny's gut tightened. He had known this confrontation was inevitable, but not so soon, not while his mind still clung to visions of Leah and Mia. Victor moved with casual arrogance, one hand resting on the car roof, the other holding a small black device, the GPS tracker he had planted hours earlier. "I heard the Queen fled the castle, Danny," Victor said, voice smooth and cruel, teeth flashing in triumph. "Word travels fast when the king is distracted by a mistress." Danny's eyes narrowed, a flash of cold fury mingling with panic. He knew Victor's words weren't just taunts, they were calculated strikes, each syllable designed to fracture the remnants of his composure. The gravel crunched under Victor's polished shoes as he stepped closer, sunlight glinting off his slicked back hair, the smell of his cologne sharp and overwhelming, like power and malice distilled into a single scent. Danny's hand twitched at his side, instinctively searching for the weight of a gun that wasn't there, realizing he had come unarmed. Victor laughed, a low, mocking sound that reverberated in the empty lot. His grin widened as he waved the GPS tracker like a trophy. "I don't want your territory today, Danny. I just wanted to see the look on your face when you realized you lost it all." The words landed like blows, precise and cutting, and Danny felt the ground shift beneath him. His empire, built with sweat, blood, and fear, seemed to crumble into dust in the shadow of Victor's triumph. Danny's gaze flicked to the surrounding warehouses, noting the rusted doors, the stacks of crates, and the long, shadowed alleys. Each corner could hide an enemy, each shadow a weapon, each echo a signal of approaching reinforcements. His body tensed, muscles coiling like a predator ready to strike, yet he was painfully aware that this battle was no longer physical. It was strategic, emotional, and terrifyingly personal. Victor stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper only Danny could hear. "Your men are starting to question you. They see a leader who chases ghosts instead of running his empire. They see a king who abandoned his castle for a wife who already left him." Each word was a scalpel, cutting into the core of Danny's identity. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of Leah's perfume on its edges, and Danny's stomach lurched at the reminder. The woman he loved was out of reach, untouchable, and his decisions had placed her in danger. Danny's secondary action became visible. He ran a hand along the hood of his car, feeling the cold metal, tracing its contours, grounding himself in the tactile reality of his environment. He could taste the tang of sweat on his lips, hear the distant caw of a crow, and feel the coarse gravel digging into the soles of his boots. Each sensation reminded him that he was alive, yet powerlessness pressed on him like a vice. Victor continued, eyes glinting with malice. "Don't misunderstand me. I have no desire to kill you today. I'm curious to see how the mighty fall when the woman they worship decides to leave." He smirked, stepping back slightly, letting the weight of the moment hang. Danny's breath came in shallow bursts, nostrils flaring, each inhale mixing the scents of asphalt dust and the ghost of Leah's presence. Danny's hands tightened on the car hood, white knuckles a reflection of his inner storm. He realized in that moment that pursuing Leah, protecting her, chasing her, had made him sloppy. His careful, calculated empire, the one built on fear, strategy, and cold precision, had blinded him to the simple truth. She and Mia were vulnerable because he had allowed emotion to override calculation. The gravel crunched again, and Danny instinctively glanced at the sedan. Victor's figure shifted in the morning haze, the sun catching the edges of his grin like a blade. Have you ever realized that in chasing what you love, you might inadvertently put it in danger? Pause. Think about it. What would you sacrifice to protect someone you love if every move you make could harm them? Comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. Victor leaned casually against the car, arms crossed, watching Danny like a hunter observing prey. The faint shimmer of sweat on his forehead caught the light, the smell of leather and cologne mixing with the morning air. Danny's secondary action became subtle pacing, each step crushing gravel, leaving prints that dissolved almost instantly, like his power, like his control over the world slipping away. Danny's mind raced through scenarios. Should he run? Should he confront? Each thought collided with another, each choice layered with risk. A wrong step could mean exposure for Leah and Mia. His pulse hammered, each beat a reminder that the stakes were higher than territory, higher than vengeance, higher than pride. The true crown he sought now rested not on the empire, but on the fragile lives he loved. Victor spoke again, voice dripping mockery, stepping closer into the circle of light from a broken street lamp. Choose wisely, Danny. Protect your crown, or protect the memory of a life that's already gone. You can't have both. The words sliced through the morning mist, leaving Danny frozen. The dust in the lot swirled at his feet, kicked up by wind, by movement, by the tension hanging like a tangible thing in the air. Danny's reflection caught in a puddle at his feet, fractured by ripples, a king staring at a ghost of himself. He pressed a hand against the hood of his car, feeling its cold, solid reassurance, and realized that this confrontation wasn't about bullets or men. It was about choice, morality, and consequences. The tactile sensation of metal under his fingers grounded him while his mind soared through possibilities. Victor's gaze narrowed, sensing the hesitation, the internal battle playing across Danny's face. He circled slowly, predatorily, boots crunching gravel, each step deliberate, each sound amplified in the empty lot. Danny's secondary actions, tapping fingers on the car, brushing a hand through his hair, shifting weight from one leg to another, spoke volumes about the turmoil inside, unspoken yet evident to anyone trained to read human tension. The lot smelled now of dust, oil, and faint rain, the air thick with unspoken threats. Danny realized that every empire he had ruled, every gun he had fired, every man he had commanded, had been preparation for this very lesson. Sometimes the true test of power was restraint, patience, and sacrifice. Victor stopped, smirk widening, voice low but carrying across the lot. Decide, King. What are you willing to lose to keep what matters most? Or will you watch it all slip away in silence? Danny's hand hovered over the car, resting on the photograph of Mia he had retrieved from the diner, clutching it as a reminder of what mattered. The gravel beneath him felt suddenly heavier, every pebble a reminder of the price of mistakes. He realized he was standing at a crossroads. One path preserved his empire but endangered Leah and Mia. The other surrendered his throne but safeguarded their lives. The chapter closes with a haunting image. Danny, standing in the industrial lot, dust rising around his boots, black sedan idling silently behind him, Victor's shadow cast long across cracked asphalt, the photo of Mia pressed to his chest, and the realization, painful and inescapable, that power without love was meaningless, and love without sacrifice could demand everything. Pause. If you were Danny, would you protect the crown or protect your family? Comment below and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter where the stakes rise even higher. Danny's knuckles ached as he gripped the steering wheel, the worn leather pressing into his palms like a silent reminder that he was still alive, still breathing, still capable of choice. The road narrowed, winding through sleepy streets lined with low cottages, the salty tang of the ocean drifting over the tires like a whisper. The mist from the surf curled over the asphalt, touching his face with cold fingers, and Danny's breath fogged in the small space of the car, mixing with the lingering scent of rain-drenched pine from the nearby dunes. Every turn he took brought him closer, every heartbeat a warning drum. Proximity carried danger, and danger carried consequences. He found them. The cottage was small, almost fragile in its peeling white paint and weathered porch, a structure that seemed to hunch against the coastal wind as though it knew the weight of protection was now its only job. Danny's eyes scanned the yard, noting the uneven cobblestones, the rusting garden tools leaning against the wall, the soft swing of a wooden bench moving in the breeze. The world around them was quiet, almost painfully serene, a stark contrast to the chaos he had left behind in the city. Through the window, Danny's gaze fell on Leah. She was sitting at a small wooden table, sunlight catching her hair in strands of copper and gold, her hands guiding Mia's tiny fingers as they moved a crayon across the paper. The color was bright, a pure yellow that seemed to radiate warmth, a visual metaphor for the new life they had begun, one that he had no right to disturb. The faint smell of crayons, wax, and paper mingling with the ocean air hit him, grounding him in a moment that felt both distant and painfully immediate. Danny's chest tightened as he studied Leah's face. Peace. A smile that wasn't for him, that hadn't been shaped by the weight of his empire, but by a life they had managed to carve from memory and hope. Her eyes held a quiet joy, the kind that comes from realizing that freedom isn't won through power, but through survival. He swallowed, dry throat scraping as his fingers brushed against the door handle of his car, the metal cold, solid, a secondary action to focus his fraying nerves. Every instinct screamed at him to rush forward, to call out her name, to take Mia in his arms and beg for another chance. But his mind faltered under the shadow of consequences. A soft laugh erupted from Mia, bright and musical, cutting through the morning air. Danny's gaze softened involuntarily, his breath catching. The sound was familiar yet painfully distant, a tether to innocence he had long abandoned. He leaned forward slightly, straining to hear, every sound amplified. The scratch of crayon on paper, the creak of the chair beneath Leah's weight, the soft sigh of the ocean wind, each sound pressed against his chest, a reminder that their life, fragile and separate from his chaos, existed without him. Then the reflection appeared. In the rearview mirror, a scout car from his own organization moved down the street, tires whispering against asphalt, engine purring quietly but deliberately. Danny froze, the sight slicing through him like a blade. He understood immediately. As long as he was Danny the boss, the Mafia King, the shadow of his sins would follow Leah and Mia, infecting their sanctuary with the very danger he had sought to flee. His heart hammered, each beat a pulse of panic, fear, and reluctant understanding. He took a secondary action, fingers brushing over the gear shift, feeling the cold metal thread into his skin, grounding him. His eyes never left the cottage window, where Leah leaned over Mia, guiding her hand in broad, deliberate strokes, the crayon moving across the paper in arcs of sunlit gold. His hand twitched toward the door handle again, almost breaking his own rule, but he stopped himself, realizing the truth. Stepping into that house would shatter the delicate bubble of peace they had cultivated. He would bring the empire, the enemies, the chaos of his life crashing into their newfound light. The wind carried the scent of salt and wet sand, wrapping around his chest like a reminder of how far he had come, and yet how far he could never belong. His fingers flexed around the steering wheel, knuckles white, tracing the threads of worn leather in repeated motion, grounding him against the rising tide of despair. The sound of seagulls in the distance pierced the mist, and Danny's mind raced with images of what could happen if he acted on impulse. Detection, retaliation, harm to Mia, harm to Leah. The stakes crystallized with brutal clarity. He took a deep breath, tasting the briny air mixed with the faint tang of car interior leather, and let it anchor him. His body tensed, ready to spring, but he forced himself to remain seated. The scout car's reflection shimmered in the rear view, a reminder that no action was without risk. Every movement he made could lead enemies straight to them. His empire had been built on domination and fear. Now the only thing that mattered was invisibility, silence, and sacrifice. Danny's gaze returned to Mia. The crayon squeaked against paper as she pressed down harder, small fingers sticky with wax. Leah's hand guided hers with patient, deliberate movements, their interaction a delicate choreography of care. Danny felt a tear escape, unbidden, sliding down his cheek, the first he had shed since childhood. He touched it with his thumb, feeling the warmth, tasting the salt that mirrored the air he breathed outside. The act of crying, of feeling this profoundly without action, grounded him, tied him to the humanity he had ignored for decades. He shifted slightly, adjusting the mirror, secondary action to maintain awareness of both the cottage and the street behind him. Gravel crunched faintly under tires as he considered his options, but each calculation returned the same grim truth. Stepping into the house would endanger them. Every instinct, honed by years of commanding fear, warned him that proximity now was vulnerability. He was a shadow that must remain unseen, a ghost for the sake of their safety. Mia's laughter cut through the mist again, bright and innocent, the sound of life unfettered. Danny pressed the photo of her he carried to his chest, feeling the weight of her existence, the fragile tether that bound him to this decision. The sound was a knife and a balm simultaneously, sharpening the reality of his sacrifice while soothing the ache of longing. Have you ever known that the right choice could hurt more than the wrong one? Pause. Think about it. How far would you go to protect someone you love, even if it meant letting them think you failed? Comment below if you understand this pain. Danny eased his hand to the gear shift, secondary action linking thought to movement, and slowly, deliberately, shifted the car into reverse. The reflection of the scout car stayed in the mirror, silent, observing, ensuring his invisibility. Every inch he backed away felt like tearing a piece of his own heart out, leaving it on the asphalt of that quiet coastal town. His eyes never left the window. Leah's gentle smile, Mia's bright joy, the crayon lines bleeding into each other. They anchored him to reality, yet highlighted the distance he had to maintain. The air smelled of salt, of wet paint from the peeling porch, of sun-warmed sand drifting in from the dunes. Danny let the sensory details soak in, each smell a tether to life outside his empire, outside his guilt, outside the violence that had shaped him. He breathed slowly, trying to memorize every detail. The curve of the porch railing, the chipped paint, the soft sway of the curtains, the rhythm of Mia's tiny breathing. Each element was a mental map of the peace he could not violate. His hand rested lightly on the horn, secondary action ready in case detection became unavoidable, yet he did not move it. Every fiber of his being screamed to intervene, yet he restrained himself, recognizing that love sometimes demanded invisibility, that true power was measured not in control, but in sacrifice. The rearview mirror reflected the scout car one last time, fading slowly as Danny slipped into the anonymity of the street beyond, leaving the cottage bathed in golden morning light. Danny's heart still pounded, every beat a reminder of the cost, yet a strange serenity settled over him. For the first time in years, he was powerless in a way that protected rather than destroyed. He swallowed hard, tasting the salt on his lips, feeling the steering wheel beneath his palms, and knew the lesson. Sometimes the greatest victories were those that left no mark, no signature, only safety and love preserved. The chapter closed with a haunting, quiet image. Danny in his car, parked across the street, rearview mirror reflecting the empty lot behind him, cottage sunlit and radiant in front of him, Mia laughing inside, Leah serene, and Danny, the king without a kingdom, choosing invisibility over intrusion, love over power, and finally understanding that sacrifice could be the purest form of protection. Pause. If you were in Danny's place, would you have the courage to walk away to protect those you love without being seen? Comment below and don't forget to subscribe. The next chapter reveals the ultimate choice that will define him forever. The rearview mirror reflected nothing but the empty street as Danny pulled away from the sunlit cottage, the wind carrying the tang of salt and ocean spray into the car, curling around him like a protective shroud. Every line of the road, every crack in the asphalt felt like a countdown. He exhaled slowly, tasting the salt on his lips, the taste mingling with the faint trace of Leah's perfume still lingering in his memory, a scent that had become an anchor to the only thing he had truly loved and could never touch again. He pressed his hands against the steering wheel, the leather rough against his palms, secondary action to center himself while his mind churned. He didn't look back at the cottage, but the image of Leah and Mia, bathed in golden light, burned into his retina. The small fingers moving a crayon, the soft curls of Mia's hair catching the morning sun, Leah's serene expression, it all replayed like a film reel, looping, unstoppable. Danny's heart throbbed painfully, a visceral reminder that some victories were silent, invisible, and yet absolute. His empire, his power, his title as king of the East Coast Mafia, everything that had defined him was meaningless compared to their safety. By the time the city skyline emerged on the horizon, his palms were raw, gripping the steering wheel as though holding on to reality itself. The familiar towers, the glinting glass, the smell of fuel and hot asphalt all seemed muted, hollow. He was returning to the world he had once ruled, yet he was no longer the man who could command it. Danny felt the weight of every choice pressing down, heavy, cold, unyielding. He had to erase himself completely, or the lives of those he loved would remain forever under threat. He staged it meticulously. Cars were set ablaze on the outskirts, GPS signals manipulated, news feeds seeded with false reports of a violent attack on his headquarters. Every detail was precise, every action designed to ensure his enemies would believe Danny Romano had vanished, swallowed by the very empire he had built. The smell of burning rubber and ash filled the air in the deserted alleyways he had arranged, and for the first time in years, he moved without fear, without power, but with purpose. Every secondary action, setting timers, watching monitors, checking fake trails, was deliberate, yet tinged with a grief he could not mask. As his empire crumbled in the hands of rivals who thought him dead, Danny felt a strange detachment. Once the thought of losing control would have made him tremble with rage, but now, every domino falling in the city felt like a relief, a necessary pruning of the weeds in the garden he had nurtured too selfishly. His hands, once steady enough to command armies and fire guns, now traced the edges of his passport, his tickets, the muted fabric of a suitcase holding the remnants of a life he would leave behind. Danny boarded a plane, the metallic scent of the cabin mixing with his own sweat, the hum of the engines vibrating through his chest. He watched the clouds pass like frozen oceans, each wave of white below a metaphor for the life he was abandoning. Powerful, untouchable, yet unreachable. Every line of cloud seemed to whisper a truth he had avoided for decades. True power was not in ruling, it was in letting go. He arrived in a foreign country, the air dry, tinged with dust and the faint scent of unfamiliar spices, and took a small room above a modest bakery. The floorboards creaked with every step, a soft symphony of mundane life that contrasted sharply with the violence he had left behind. He went to work, cleaning tables, carrying crates, performing tasks without recognition, without name, without the shadow of his past looming over him. The physicality of labor grounded him, secondary actions again, but the emptiness of anonymity pressed against his soul, a reminder that he was now a ghost. Months passed. The small room smelled of bread, yeast, and the faint tang of morning dew through the window. Danny learned the rhythm of a life stripped of danger, the weight of crates, the scrape of mops against tile, the hiss of coffee machines, all grounding, yet all a constant echo of absence. He ate alone, slept alone, and sometimes caught himself staring at the window, imagining Leah and Mia laughing in the cottage, the warmth of their new life threading through the fog of memory. Then one day, a small envelope appeared on his doorstep. No return address, no markings, just a quiet, unassuming slip of paper. Danny's fingers trembled as he picked it up, the tactile sensation of paper and the faint smell of ink pulling him back into a world he had abandoned. He opened it slowly, almost reverently, and inside was a single photograph. Mia, 3 years old, wearing a shirt that proclaimed, "My daddy is a hero." She grinned, golden curls catching sunlight like threads of promise. Danny's throat tightened, the photograph trembling in his hands. Beneath it lay a small lock of hair, soft and warm even through the paper envelope. He pressed it to his cheek, secondary action anchoring him to reality, tasting the salt of his own tears. On the back, Leah had written a note. "You chose them over yourself for the first time in your life. That's the man I fell in love with." The words burned into him, simultaneously comforting and cutting. He understood now that all the absence, all the sacrifice had not been in vain. They were safe. They were happy. And he, the king who had walked away, was finally invisible enough to guarantee their safety. Danny pressed the photograph to his chest, feeling the texture of paper, the warmth of the hair, the echo of laughter trapped in a single frame. The air in the room smelled faintly of ink, wood polish, and the faint brine of his memories. He walked to a small burner in the corner, a mundane, deliberate action that mirrored all the sacrifices he had made, and set the photo alight. Flames curled soft and deliberate, consuming paper and memory alike. He watched the fire consume it, the crackle loud in the small, silent room, until nothing remained but ash. Sitting in the dark, Danny understood the final lesson. True power was the ability to remain unseen, the courage to walk away, the willingness to die to the world so that those you love could live in light. Every creak of the floorboard, every hiss of the burner, every faint scent of smoke reminded him of the world he had abandoned and of the safety he had finally bought with the currency of self. Outside, the wind carried the scent of sea and salt, whispering through the small streets like a promise that life continued, unbroken, radiant and untouched by shadows. Danny felt the ache in his chest, the hollow absence of empire, an influence but also a quiet, unshakable peace. He was alive, yet dead to the world he had left behind. He was a father, unseen, protective, a ghost who had finally earned the right to linger only in memory. The chapter closed with a haunting image. Danny, seated in the dim light of his small room, shadows stretching across the floorboards, ash from the burned photograph scattering like snow, a faint smile touching his lips as a tear traced down his cheek. The king, without a kingdom, the father who had learned that invisibility could be the ultimate gift, and the strength to stay dead could be the purest form of love. Pause. If you had to sacrifice everything for the safety of someone you love, could you? Would you have the courage to disappear from your own life? Comment below and subscribe to witness the power of choices that shape destiny. Danny's empire crumbled, his crown lost, yet he found something far more powerful: love, sacrifice, and the courage to protect the ones who truly mattered. Every choice, every silent step, every heartbeat of absence carved a path that only the bravest could follow. Now ask yourself, if it meant keeping someone you love safe, could you walk away from everything you've built? Could you disappear from your own life to become a living ghost? If Danny's journey touched you, if the story made your heart race, your hands tremble, or your soul ache, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story where love, sacrifice, and destiny collide. And don't forget, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you would do if you were Danny. Could you choose them over yourself? Because every choice we make leaves a mark, and every story leaves a lesson.